"Move this thing, old man. We're not on parade." James Holloway didn't answer. He finished wiping the side mirror, stepped up, and opened the door. Same heavy boots, same silence. Every morning. But that day, as the early fog cleared over Route 27, something shifted. The new kid, posture stiff, haircut fresh, paused halfway up the steps. His eyes locked on Holloway's forearm, a faded mark beneath time-worn skin. Red numeral, black border, the big red one, unmistakable. The young man froze. Holloway muttered without looking, "Still your post, soldier." And the entire bus went silent. If you believe quiet strength still commands respect, let me know where you're watching from. I read every word. Bus 27 left the depot every morning at 5:45 a.m. sharp, rain or sun, holiday or weekday, always the same. James Holloway was never late. Not once in 16 years. He didn't talk, didn't wave, didn't play music, didn't nod at familiar faces. His job was to drive, and he did, like it still meant something. His badge just said Holloway. But the other drivers called him Boots for the worn combat-style footwear he wore, despite the city-issued soft soles. His jacket, a plain brown canvas coat, had no patches. But the way it sat on his shoulders, crisp, deliberate, made him look like he still belonged somewhere that had rules. Some mornings, a younger driver named Vince watched Holloway perform his pre-check with surgical precision. Mirror, tires, lights, battery, door. "He's a relic," Vince once muttered. "Bet he still checks under the chassis like he's back in the field." He wasn't wrong. No one saw Holloway loosen up, not even in summer. His left sleeve was always rolled halfway, not enough to seem unprofessional, but just enough to cool the forearm, or maybe to let it breathe. Caleb Turner noticed. He had just moved to town 2 weeks earlier, a recruit awaiting his first drill weekend with the National Guard. He boarded bus 27 like everyone else. Quiet, early, unsure where to sit. But he watched Holloway. He saw how the man scanned his mirrors every 90 seconds, how he shifted gears without a sound, how his spine stayed straight even on long curves. He noticed how civilians saw Holloway, or didn't. People tapped phones, adjusted backpacks, nodded off by the window. They saw a man, older, gray, driving a bus. But Caleb saw something else. At 6:09 a.m., the bus stopped on Jefferson and 4th. An older woman waited there, plastic bags in both hands, cane hooked on her wrist. As she climbed, one of the bags tore, scattering oranges and a carton of eggs onto the pavement. Before she could react, Holloway set the brake. He opened the door fully, stepped down, and gathered each item in silence. He double-knotted the bag, nodded once, and returned to his seat. The woman whispered thanks. He said nothing. Caleb frowned, not in disapproval, but curiosity. He leaned slightly to the right, just enough to catch the sunlight now stretching through the windows. And there it was. On Holloway's left forearm, just visible where the sleeve ended, a faded tattoo, red numeral, black outline, the one of the big red one. Caleb had seen it in training pamphlets, in old war photos, in the eyes of instructors who didn't like to talk too much. He looked again at the driver, the way he moved, the silence, the eyes that checked everything without blinking. This wasn't just a bus route. This was a patrol, a routine, a mission. And Holloway, whatever he'd been before, was still at post. The terminal had changed. Digital signs replaced clipboards. Younger drivers joked louder. Uniforms got looser, routes got faster. But Holloway didn't change. Same boots, same folded cloth for the mirrors. Same creased jacket, brown canvas, worn at the elbows, zippered up halfway, no insignia. He arrived 15 minutes early every day, regardless of weather. He never asked for overtime, never called in sick, never complained. But that discipline, that quiet consistency, didn't earn him admiration anymore. Not here. "Guys still in basic," muttered Vince, now promoted to dispatcher on alternate Fridays. He leaned back in his chair as Holloway passed by to check the route sheet. "Hey, Sarge, don't forget to salute the stop signs," he added with a smirk. Laughter from 2 other drivers. Holloway didn't stop, didn't frown, didn't blink. He just picked up the clipboard and walked toward his bus. Vince shook his head. Man should be on a porch somewhere, not clogging intersections with his nostalgia. In the parking lot, a few younger drivers mimicked his slow walk. Stiff arms, straight back, exaggerated mirror checks. He noticed. Of course he noticed. But Holloway had mastered the art of invisibility, the kind you learn when people only see your age, not your weight, not your history, not your scars. Out on the road, it wasn't much better. Passengers grew impatient with his methodical pace. He waited those extra seconds at green lights, slowed early before turns, let pedestrians cross even when they hesitated. He followed every rule like it still mattered, which made him an easy target. A teenage boy shouted from the back seat, "You driving this thing or praying over it?" Another morning, a man in a suit muttered into his phone, "Of course I'll be late. We've got a museum piece at the wheel." Nobody defended him. Nobody corrected them. They just stared at their screens, letting the silence eat whatever dignity might have been left in the air. Caleb Turner noticed. He had started riding Bus 27 2 weeks ago, first out of necessity, then out of something else he couldn't explain. He sat mid-aisle, backpack on lap, never spoke, but he watched. He watched the way Holloway reset the mirrors every third stop, the way his hand hovered over the brake an extra second before each intersection, the way his spine never touched the backrest. One day, at the Jefferson Street stop, a woman with a limp stepped aboard with grocery bags in both hands. The bus was packed. No one moved. Caleb stood to offer his seat, but before he could step into the aisle, the bus jerked. Holloway had set the brake. He stood, walked back, and helped the woman place her bags behind the driver's shield, a space normally off-limits. He didn't explain. He didn't announce it. He simply returned to the wheel, checked his mirrors again, and resumed the route. Later that day, back at the depot, a new poster went up near the locker area. Updated driving standards, streamlining passenger flow and reducing dwell time. Bullet points beneath listed delays caused by excessive caution, manual assistance, or unnecessary courtesy. Everyone knew who it was about. Caleb stood in front of the poster for a long time. He didn't say anything. But that night, alone in his apartment, he searched for 1st Infantry Division tattoo and stared at the images. Red numeral, black outline. It was the same mark he'd seen on Holloway's forearm. And suddenly, every quiet movement the old man made felt heavier, more deliberate, more earned. The next morning, the bus rolled out under a gray sky, fog clinging to the edges of the road like it didn't want to leave. Holloway's routine didn't change. It never did. But something else had. Caleb had started sitting closer to the front, not next to the driver, not that bold, but 2 seats behind, close enough to watch. That morning, the bus passed a school zone where a crossing guard was absent. Traffic slowed. A child stood on the curb, unsure. Cars moved around him without stopping. Without hesitation, Holloway set the brake. He opened the door and stepped into the street, one palm raised, the other gently motioning the boy across. He waited until the child reached the sidewalk before returning to the driver's seat. No words, no announcement. Just a duty fulfilled like it was still part of the mission. Nobody clapped. Nobody thanked him. But Caleb sat straighter. Later that week, a mother and her teenage son boarded. The boy wore earbuds, hoodie up. He barely looked at Holloway, mumbled something, and slumped into a seat near the rear. They rode in silence until the boy's music began to blare through his speakers. Holloway didn't turn, didn't scold. He simply adjusted the rear-view mirror until his eyes met the mother's. She understood. She tapped her son's arm. He rolled his eyes and turned it down. That was how Holloway did things. Caleb began noticing other details. At one stop, a veteran boarded, a man in his 60s with a hat from a long-retired unit and a limp that told its own story. As he climbed, Holloway quietly moved the brake handle to make the step platform lower. The vet nodded once. No words passed between them, but the silence felt acknowledged. It wasn't long before Caleb started talking to others at the depot. He asked an older mechanic, "Hey, you ever ride with Holloway?" The man looked up from his clipboard. "You mean the ghost?" He grinned faintly. "Yeah, years ago, before they took away our base routes." Caleb hesitated. Was he ever military? The man's smile faded. Kid, that man didn't just serve. He stayed. Some guys come home and forget how to stand. Not him. Caleb nodded, unsure what to say. That night, he wrote a short post on a local veterans forum. No names, no photos, just a reflection. There's an old man who drives my morning route. He doesn't speak, doesn't smile, but the way he sits, the way he watches the road, the way he lets no detail slip, I swear it's like he's still out there, guarding something none of us can see. Maybe some people don't stop serving. They just change uniforms. 2 days later, the post had 73 replies, most of them short. Many with just one phrase, sounds like Holloway. Someone added, ask him if he was at Quang Tri. Another replied, look for the red one. But Caleb didn't ask. Not yet. Some truths he was starting to understand don't need confirmation. They live in how a man carries his silence, in the weight of a glance, in the way he steps off a bus to help a child, and doesn't think it's heroic. It started with a folded piece of paper. One morning, after completing his route, Holloway returned to find a note taped neatly to the driver's console. Clean print, no signature, no flourish. You still remember Quang Tri? He stared at it longer than necessary, then folded it twice and slipped it into his coat pocket without a sound. The next morning, something had changed. At the depot, 3 younger drivers stopped talking when he passed. One nodded, just once, the kind of nod that says, I heard something, and I believe it. Holloway didn't return it. He just walked to bus 27 and began his checks. But inside the online forums, things were far less quiet. Bus 27. Faded red one tattoo, steady as hell. Could it be Holloway? My old CO used to talk about him, Firebase Atlanta, Ghost Evac. If it's him, we need to know. That man was legend. Caleb read every thread. He didn't reply. Didn't need to. He knew. By Friday, a few soldiers began riding the route out of uniform. Posture too perfect, boots too clean. They sat in silence, nodded on the way in. One of them, early 20s, with a jaw still soft from youth, stood up as Holloway entered the bus. No one said anything, but the message was clear. Then came Monday. At exactly 5:45 a.m., Bus 27 pulled into the depot loop and boarded a man in full dress uniform. The weight of his presence was immediate. Shoes polished, medals gleaming, no hesitation in his step. Cole Brandon Myers, Regional Commander, Army Reserve. He scanned the bus, nodded to the other passengers, and stopped in front of Holloway. Permission to ride, Sergeant. Holloway didn't blink. You got a seat, Colonel. The Colonel sat directly behind him. 3 stops passed in complete silence. Then the Colonel leaned forward, voice low. I reviewed the records. James Holloway, 1st Infantry Division, Vietnam, 68 to 72. 3 tours, Bronze Star, 2 Silver Star recommendations. Firebase Atlanta. Last man out. Holloway's hands tightened ever so slightly on the wheel. That was another life. With respect, Sergeant, the Colonel said. You and I both know, and some men never really come home. Another pause, just the hum of the road. You led a team through open jungle with 2 wounded. You refused evac until every man was accounted for. You saved 6 lives that day. That's not how I remember it, Holloway said quietly. How do you remember it? I remember the 7th. The bus remained silent. Even the passengers in the back felt it. Caleb sat frozen, barely breathing. That afternoon, things moved quickly. The plaque appeared first. Brass, small, unceremonious, bolted into the bulkhead behind the driver's seat. In honor of Sergeant James Holloway, who never stopped showing up. Someone left a folded American flag in a glass case on the front panel. No announcement, no photo op, just reverence. The city issued no press release, but veterans began lining the stops more frequently. Some just rode a few blocks in silence. Others touched the plaque gently on their way out. Holloway said nothing. He never did. But Caleb saw the change, how his shoulders relaxed half an inch, how he held a gaze 1 second longer, how, when a recruit saluted by reflex at the end of the line, Holloway gave the slightest nod in return. If you believe quiet strength is worth honoring, and that real leadership doesn't shout, consider subscribing. These are the stories we tell. For those who still understand what it means to serve. The seasons passed. Leaves turned, flags fluttered, boots changed, but Bus 27 never missed a stop. Holloway kept driving. 3 more years. Same route, same silence. For the recruits stationed nearby, riding his bus became a kind of rite of passage. No one said it aloud, but every young soldier who boarded seemed to know. You didn't speak loudly, you didn't put your feet on the seats, and you didn't let trash hit the floor. Even the civilians began to follow suit. Quiet respect, unspoken rules. Holloway noticed, but he never acknowledged it. His job was still the same. Until one morning in January. The base stop was quiet. Light snow fell. A young sergeant stepped forward, holding a folded envelope. "Sir," he said carefully, "they asked me to deliver this." Holloway opened it slowly, eyes scanning the page. A formal letter from the transit board. Retirement scheduled for March 1st. Requested or not, the date had arrived. He folded the paper, placed it under the dash, and said nothing. That day, he drove the route like always. But when he stopped at the old Jefferson corner, Caleb, now in full uniform, boarded with a simple nod. He took his seat, same place he'd always sat, 2 rows behind the driver. This time, a small package rested in his hands. He held it until the ride ended, March 1st. Before dawn, Bus 27 sat quietly in the depot. But this time, when Holloway arrived, something was different. Every seat inside was already filled. Veterans, soldiers, recruits, mechanics, dispatchers, all in civilian clothes, but all unmistakable. Some he recognized, others only by posture. The bus pulled away from the lot in silence. No one spoke. Not a cough, not a phone buzz. Just the hum of the engine and the rhythm of tires over familiar roads. As they reached the final loop, Holloway glanced at the mirror. Dozens of eyes met his. No one blinked. He parked the bus, turned the key, and stood. That's when he saw it. Outside the terminal, the other buses had been moved into formation, lined side by side in a quiet corridor. In the center, a stone monument. Simple, elegant, engraved in bronze. Heroes don't announce themselves. They show up, every single day. Holloway stepped off the bus, duffel bag in hand. The line of passengers parted for him like a quiet tide. They didn't speak. They didn't salute. But each one stood at attention as he passed. At the edge of the lot, Caleb waited beside a dusty navy blue pickup. He opened the passenger door and stood tall. "Need a ride, Sergeant?" Holloway paused, then nodded once. "Appreciate it, Lieutenant." A photographer from the base caught the moment. A weathered man with a duffel bag, walking past 30 silent soldiers toward a simple truck. The image would spread through military circles like wildfire, captioned with just one line. Sergeant James Holloway never needed a stage, just a steering wheel. Back at the depot, Bus 27 was retired, but the plaque stayed. And every new driver assigned to that route was handed a printed sheet during training. It read, "Respect the silence. You're driving his route now." If this story moved you, type honor in the comments. Your voice matters, and I read every one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, here's your quiet reminder. Thank you for being here.